With the second main topic down and out of the way, let's get into our third and final main topic for this podcast episode, which is going to be treading on waters that I've never really experienced before since starting this podcast and really following women's soccer closely. This is going to shift gears and go to the NWSL. Basically, the main topic is the Boston Breakers and Sky Blue have been cited in a visa fraud scheme. So let me back up a little bit. Let's back up to yesterday, which would have been Saturday, February 13th. A developing story ended up surfacing that a former chief operating officer, his name was Justin Capel, he was the chief operating officer of a now defunct youth soccer organization called Global Premier Soccer. And he was charged and I believe now pleaded guilty to a form of visa fraud conspiracy. Basically, what Global Premier Soccer does is they are a youth soccer development. That's all I really know, to be honest. They are some kind of youth soccer development network. So, what does this what happened? Let me back up. What happened? What does Global Premier Soccer have to do anything? Well, this is what happened. They have allegedly brought in over 100 soccer coaches from abroad into the United States, which of course that kind of makes sense, right? Like when you are a soccer organization and you're trying to develop youth talent, you're going to need coaches, right? So they decided we want to bring in about 100 coaches from abroad, bring them into our network and help grow the brand, help grow Global Premier Soccer and youth soccer, which on the surface that makes a ton of sense, right? That's what your organization is meant to do. However, what gets complicated is when you want to bring employees, whether you're a professional organization like soccer or just a regular company like, I don't know, Hershey's. That's just the only one I could think of. Stick with me here. But whenever you want to bring companies in or employees in from abroad, there are some legal ramifications and hoops that you have to jump through. That's just the reality of it. There are laws that you have to follow in order to do that legally and successfully, from what I understand. Before I get further into this, I want to be perfectly clear. I am no lawyer, and a lot of this is speculation. I am merely trying to go over the facts of what is part of the story so far. So take that all with a grain of salt. I am no lawyer. I know next to nothing about American law besides the fact that I live in America. So just keep that in mind as I'm kind of going through the rest of this main topic. But at the end of the day, what does Global Premier Soccer bringing in 100 coaches from abroad and in a fraud case have anything to do with the Boston Breakers and Sky Blue and the rest of the NWSL? Well, with the rest of the NWSL, it has nothing to do with. However, what does it have to do with the Boston Breakers and Sky Blue? From what I understand, from the way I've been understanding this from reading it on The Equalizer, hearing from Meg Linehan, to help bypass some of the restrictions that come with hiring coaches from abroad like Global Premier Soccer was wanting to do, Global Premier Soccer ended up involving some ownership and maybe even some staff, not really sure, from the Boston Breakers and Sky Blue FC. This was all the way back in 2016, so this was half a decade ago. So here's how essentially it all went down. Global Premier Soccer has this problem, right? They want to bring in 100 coaches from abroad. In order to do that, you have to go through some restrictions. You got to go through the proper paperwork, and you have to get them visas, they call them, which is basically a working permit to work in the United States if you're not an American citizen. So it sounds like Global Premier Soccer had trouble getting these visas. They're like, we don't have the means to do so. So they're like, we've got this problem. Who can help us? Well, we've got some contacts at some NWSL team front offices, including those at the Boston Breakers and Sky Blue FC. So like, let's see if we can bring them in, and they can help us solve our problem. So it turns out that in the NWSL with the Boston Breakers and Sky Blue, and even today, I believe some of these teams can still do this. They have the ability to get some of their staff and personnel what they call P1 visas, if I'm not mistaken, which means I don't really know what it really means on the surface, but it's basically a visa that is exclusive to professional sports teams like Sky Blue and the Boston Breakers. So, hypothetically speaking, if the Boston Breakers and Sky Blue hired any employee, they could grant them a visa because they'd be under contract with them, and that's a visa exclusive to professional sports teams. So this is what Global Premier Soccer says. They're like, okay, Sky Blue and Boston Breakers, How about we do this? We get those 100 coaches from abroad. You guys from the Boston Breakers and Sky Blue can sign them under contract as quote unquote professional scouts, and you guys can sign their contracts for anywhere between $25,000 to $50,000. However, they won't really work for you. Once they get these contracts and they get their visas, we don't really need you guys anymore. They can just come and do their work with Global Premier Soccer and keep their visas, but we'll just operate under the facade that they are professional scouts for your organization. So they're like, okay, great, that sounds good. That's what the arrangement would look like. In doing so, it solves Global Premier Soccer's problem because it gets those 100 coaches from abroad over into the United States. It gets them a visa to legally work in the United States and also do their work for Global Premier Soccer. Done deal. But once the visas were secured, the coaches would never report to Sky Blue or the Boston Breakers, but they would just work for Global Premier Soccer. So that's illegal from what I understand and what I know about this situation. When they by them saying that, oh, we're professional scouts for Sky Blue and Boston Breakers, but not fulfilling that obligation and actually under the hood working for another organization, I believe that's illegal in terms of foreign work laws, if I'm not mistaken, in the U.S. Like I said earlier, I want to remind you of the disclaimer, I am no American lawyer, especially in work law or any law whatsoever, but the reality of it is they broke some laws in coming to that arrangement. A few more details on the story in particular. It looks like Sky Blue was responsible for about 40 applications for those P1 visas that they're trying to get for those out of those 100 coaches. Where this gets kind of interesting is at the time in 2016 when this was all going down, who was the coach of Sky Blue? Well, that was Christy Holly. Christy Holly was the coach of Sky Blue at that time. I don't know if there's any implications for him in this particular case. That remains to be seen. Like I said, this is a developing story. But he was recently hired to Racing Louisville, and he cited saying that the coaches never technically worked for Sky Blue, the ones that came over from overseas and got those visas with Sky Blue and Boston Breakers. But he said that he benefited from their information on several signings when they might have drafted or signed players on multiple occasions. So maybe that could be a case that he's arguing that, well, they didn't technically work for us, but I still benefit from their information, so technically they could have. It's a whole legal mess that, like I said, I am not qualified to answer. I'm just giving you the information that I have heard and seen. So, what does this really all mean? What does the Boston Breakers and Sky Blue FC being involved in this fraud case, what does it really mean for them? For them in particular, that'll be interesting to see. Of course, there are going to be legal ramifications for those involved, including Justin Capel, who pleaded guilty, I believe, to these charges. We just don't really know what other implications and for who that are quite yet going to be going down. It ventures into territory, like I said, with United States work laws that I know nothing about. But I'm going to answer this question because some of you might be thinking, are these teams going to be punished? Clubs not going to disband or anything like that? I seriously doubt there are going to be any ramifications for the teams as a whole. I want to be clear on this. For the teams as a whole, for a few reasons. One, the Boston Breakers don't even exist anymore. They were a team that disbanded back in 2018, so you can't disband a team that's already disbanded. In terms of Sky Blue, I don't see any punishment at a club level either because all of the people, to my knowledge, that were involved in that fraud case back in 2016, none of them work for Sky Blue anymore. That they are all gone, done and dusted, no longer a part of the club. Why would you punish the club? And I believe legally, I don't think the American court system can punish these teams on a whole level and disband them. They don't have that kind of power from what I understand. So for those of you who are Sky Blue fans, don't fret, your club will probably still remain if my thought process is correct, which would make a ton of sense, at least from my point of view. The only thing I can see really happening to anything going on directly in the league in terms of legal ramifications is Christy Holly, as you know, was hired recently to work as Racing Louisville's head coach. If he endures legal ramifications, does that impact his employment with Racing Louisville? What if he can't what if he's let go by Racing Louisville? Well, of course, that's going to change things for Racing Louisville. However, like I said, and I want to be clear here, that is pure speculation. I do not know if anything will actually happen legally to Christy Holly. I don't know if he actually did anything wrong. No one really knows. I am just speculating because this is an ever-developing story that I just wanted to bring to your guys' attention, so then we can all just talk about it as it kind of goes on. So, that is a really long and complicated breakdown of kind of what has surfaced over the weekend. I am really intrigued to see how this kind of plays out, especially since I've been following or following women's soccer really closely. Nothing like this has really happened, so it should all be very, very interesting. Other than that, guys, what do you make of this particular situation? Feel free to jump down in the comments below and let me know just your thoughts overall, whether or not there's other information out there. It's going to be really interesting to see how this all develops and how it will go down at the end of the day. So, yeah, stay tuned. We'll see how everything shapes up. All right, guys. So, with that third and main topic down and out of the way, that'll actually do it for the Women's Soccer/Football podcast. This has been episode 14, which has been a ton of fun to shoot and also air on YouTube today. Like I said earlier, it's been an awesome honor and privilege hosting you today in today's podcast. I've been Bryce. This has been the Women's Soccer/Football podcast. If you guys like what you're seeing and hearing, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and always share with your friends so that people just like you can get involved in the fandom and we can all have a ton of fun together following the world of WOSO and all the magnificent things in it. I look forward to seeing you all in the next podcast episode and on TikTok, Instagram, and the like. My name's Bryce, and this has been the Women's Soccer/Football podcast, and as always, have a great day.